Hey Worship Leader, welcome back to the channel. Today I have some great friends of mine, Steve and Lisa Goldberg. Welcome. How y'all feeling?
We're feeling great.
We're
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So, y'all have written a book, The Journey to Stay. I've read it this week. Amazing book, and I know it's going to be helpful for many people, whether they have dealt with infidelity or not. I think of ministry leaders who might need to help lead people through this and have resources to be able to know what to say. I think this book just gave me even more wisdom. And people who are married, who want to protect their marriage. You even said that at the beginning of the book. Sure. So this is not just grab this book if you're dealing with infidelity. Definitely do, right? But I think it'd be beneficial for anyone. So we're going to, I'm telling y'all, grab this book right now. But we're also going to do a giveaway. So I'm going to put a link down below and give a book away and to a lucky, winner. And I'm just, I wanted to say at the beginning that I was very impressed with this book, the quality of it, the feel, the artist in me, I love it, the touching it. It just is really well done, but it's also laid out really well. Can you explain to me like the decision to not tell your story chronologically and how you chose to tell your story?
Yeah,
sure.
we decided to tell the story thematically, ultimately because we wanted people to understand the lessons that we learned from God.
Yeah.
And that was more important than actually the details of our story. And so we wanted to make sure that the lessons that we learned got out, and our story would just simply be an example of that. So that's how we decided thematically versus chronologically.
And it was so good because it helps keep the attention. I couldn't put it down. I literally read this in a day and a half, and it was just I just flew through the book because it was also I love how there are sections where you tell your story and then you see the same thing from your perspective and going back and forth. How was that writing, and how was the writing process of getting your story out that way?
It was amazing. You have to understand, we're writing this book at that point 14 years after the reveal of my affair. And so we had to rehash everything because we've been working with couples for years, and she talks to the wives, I talk to the husbands, primarily. And so it's the going through all the details of what happened in our story, how it happened. We had a full week where we outlined the book. And I'm telling you, it was a full week. Lots of tears. Lots of...
Our kid was at camp,
yes.
And we were like, go, So, yeah.
Yeah, so we outlined the whole book in a week. Wow. And just had to rehash everything. And so that's how it came together, and how it came together thematically.
Wow.
Yeah.
I remember one of those weeks, whether it was that one or the week after, where you had notes all over your house.
That was that
week.
That
was that week.
The whole house was covered in Post-it notes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was so intrigued, and I was so intrigued about when it came out. I was like, wow, that happened so quickly. Y'all were just... From an outsider, it seemed like that. Well, before we dive deeper in, I want to just explain who you guys are to me. You were at the church I serve at for how many years have we known each other now? Is it?
It's about 2 years.
About 2 years. That's what I was thinking last night. Steve is a guitar player, worship leader. If you'll know more about that in the book, at least your history in music. Really appreciate the Goldbergs. You auditioned and then you left.
Yeah.
It's okay. Now you're leading worship at another church right down the road.
Yeah, right down the road.
Yeah. So, yes, like I said, the book took me by surprise with the quality, the layout of it, but then obviously the story itself. I mean, I've known y'all for 2 years, but I learned so much just from this book. And tell us a little bit about Side by Side. What is that? Tell us a little bit about that part of the organization, and I know how this ties into that.
So after the reveal of Steve's affair, which was shocking to us and took quite some time to work through, we also clearly got a message from God that we were supposed to tell our story. That was just what we both believed. We were supposed to be vocal about something that people tend to not want to be vocal about. Typically, this is something that people prefer to kind of keep in the confines of their home. They like to work through it quietly. We ended up working through it pretty boldly and loudly. And ultimately, a ministry came out of that. So God telling us to tell our story, we began telling it actually musically to begin with. And then gradually people started coming to us asking for help. And we were like, we're just regular people. Like, we're not counselors. We don't know exactly how to do this, but you can come and sit on our couch and we'll tell you what we did. And ultimately people's marriages were being saved through that process of us just really ignorantly sharing as best we could, and it has grown from there. And the book is part of the ministry now. It's a part of one of the 3 paths that we help people through. They can receive help through the book from us directly, and coming in 2024 an extensive digital course that will also help to walk people through infidelity.
I'm a big fan of that. I think it's very needed. So how can people find you? What's the website called? Is it
staysidebyside.org?
Okay, I'll try to put that on the screen. Okay, we'll mention it again at the end. But I just want to let people know how they can get a hold of you. So go ahead and tell us a story. Like, y'all met. What happened to set this up?
Sure. I mean, we could even start before that.
Yeah.
You know, like, we both come from broken homes. Both of our parents are divorced. I was raised Jewish. Lisa was raised in the Midwest, going to church, but not really having a relationship with Christ. And so when we met, it was like, you know, neither one of us was following our childhood religions, if you want to say. And we just felt like our love would kind of carry us through, like a lot of people do, you know?
Yeah.
And so for us, it was like, well, we love each other. We've been dating for a while. What's the next step? Well, let's just get married, you know?
Let's just do it. Honestly.
Let's just do it. I mean, I know it for myself at that time. Like, I didn't have a strong view of the marriage commitment at all. It was just like, well, this is the next step. And if it doesn't work out, like, we'll just get divorced and find someone else. You know, like, that was kind of what I brought into the marriage, you know, from my experience. And so, you know, so we got married and things started crumbling after, you know, pretty much right from the start.
Well, our marriage was built on pride. Ultimately,
Oh,
it wasn't.
totally.
There was no foundation. We were sinking sand, for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so we basically had this shell of a marriage. We were living individual lives. And so to fill that void in the marriage, Lisa actually started going back to church. And she got involved in an in-depth Bible study and recommitted her life to Christ.
Now, how did that happen?
Man, I had tried everything else.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
You know, so it's like I had done all the things. At the time, my career was as a professional actor, and so the theater world is dark in many ways, and so you know, I had done all the things. You know, drinking, drugs, friends, parties, all, you know, what's going to satisfy me, career driven, all of that stuff. And it was like, well, what do I have left? Because I still feel empty and void. And so for whatever reason, there was this little church on the corner, and I decided that, well, I haven't tried that yet. So let me go see if that works. And it reminded me of some of the feelings I experienced as a young child. I had been in rebellion for so long, and all I can say is that the Lord drew me to him, you know? So it was nothing of my own doing. To me, it just felt like a last ditch effort, trying to find something in my life. And ultimately I experienced the presence of God, pretty quickly in that.
That's amazing.
Yeah. He did the opposite.
I did the exact opposite.
You did not. Okay.
I did not. Yeah. I mean, at the time, I tried to fill that void by doing more shows. I was in a band at the time, doing more shows with my band, hanging out with friends, again, drinking, all this stuff. And I ended up having an affair for a year and a half, and filling that void in our marriage by having an affair. And it was it was one of those things that you know, affairs are like a fantasy world, you know, that you just want to stay in. It's not real life, you know. So it was very appealing to escape the troubles of our marriage and kind of head in that direction.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I became the enemy, and she became the savior. When really we have a real enemy,
Right.
and Jesus is our savior.
Yeah.
But we didn't know that, and he certainly didn't. At the time, he's a non-practicing Jew.
Right.
Jesus was a curse word in his home.
Yeah.
So it didn't make sense to him to look to anything else as a savior other than another person or situation.
And I remember in the book where you said, like, focusing on the right enemy,
Yes.
right? She was the enemy for too long, and then you realized, wait, there's somebody who's ready to devour me.
Yes.
And that was a little process to get there. I know that was more towards the end of the book, but can you explain a little bit of that, what that was like for you?
Both of us, when we were experiencing trouble in our marriage, ultimately we believed that the other person was at fault. So it's so easy to, we can look at this right in the garden, right? So like Adam and Eve gave us a clear picture of blame shifting, but we both thought that the other one was at fault. And we were determined, maybe me a little bit more than Steve outwardly, but we were determined to prove our point as you're wrong, I'm right, and we sat in that place for so long that it just became this very conflict-driven, abrasive situation in our marriage because we felt like the other person was the enemy. Yeah. And so until we actually realized that we have a real enemy, our sin, works against us as well, obviously. And there are outside things in the world that work against us, but we have a real enemy that comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And of course, he's going to want to go after the one thing that is meant to represent the beauty of God, in this one flesh relationship in marriage. And so once we realized, wow, there's an outside source that's trying to destroy us, it was quite helpful to see that we needed to be teammates in the healing of our marriage and not view each other as the enemy.
Right. Now, Steve, you finish your thought, what you were saying about your story, but then head into how hard it was to come completely clean, like every detail, even though I think in there you said, I would like to avoid conflict at all costs, right?
Yeah, I'm definitely wired that way. I am conflict avoidant, and it would really hurt me or hurt us really in the marriage. And we see this a lot with the couples that we work with. A theme that we've noticed a lot is kind of a, strong, wife and a passive husband, and that affairs are very ripe to happen in that kind of situation because a lot of times the husband will just kind of, this is what I did, I would just internalize everything and I just would let it stack up and build up, and I was just keeping a record of her wrongs, and every time she wronged me it was just one more stone on the pile, and honestly keeping her as the enemy through that time validated, my behavior, and it was like, well, of course I'm going to be this way. It's her fault that I'm even doing this. And so, at that point I had no understanding of Christ. I had no understanding of Christianity at all, or even an understanding of forgiveness. And I will say that during that time, of being in the affair, it was, it had when you're in it, it's like that fantasy, but then there is a crushing weight that comes on you afterwards. It literally, when the Bible says that the wages of sin, is death, it's like, that's what I wanted. Yeah. I could not see any other way out of it. I just wanted to be completely done with this life.
It's crazy to imagine that he actually, throughout that process of being in the affair, in the moment, it would, be like, oh, this is really great in the moment when he's with her and it's satisfying. And then he steps out and feels the guilt and the shame. And then his response was not, oh, let me go ahead and confess this, that freedom will come from that confession. It was, can you just kill me now, God? Because I don't see how I can do this, because the concept of confession seemed like it was only going to make things far worse for you, which is why he held out from confessing to me for so long.
And we see that, that's typical sin, wants to be isolated, hidden, and it's a lie, right? Because then you explained that the freedom you felt, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, so I, in the night that we call the reveal, which is where we had been separated for about a month or so, and we finally came back together in the same house, and we had a conversation one night, and I'm pacing back and forth in the room, not wanting to let this out for fear that Lisa was going to just leave me, or just for fear that the conflict, honestly, of everything that was about to happen once I dropped this bomb. And when it came out that I was having an affair, rather than kicking me out and my life being over, she said, I love you. We can make it through this. Yeah. And it was that moment that I felt this amazing just forgiveness that I had never experienced before. It was like complete undeserved forgiveness. It was like grace. And I believe that in that moment that I felt, what it feels like to be forgiven, by Jesus. That was my first taste of it. I had no idea what was happening at the time. I just knew that like chains were falling off.
Yep. And it wasn't just an intellectual thing. You felt it. I mean, you're like, there was no way out, and now I have this joy.
Yeah, because I
at
knew
least freedom.
Yeah, totally. In that split second that happened, and she had that response. Yeah. I had like an overwhelming desire to fight for my marriage, which I hadn't had in years.
Yeah. Wow. And so that's perfect. I was going to ask you, how are you able to say in that moment? Now we know the answer, Holy Spirit, but walk us through what that was like for you to say, I love you. We can make this work.
So prior to that night, I had gone back to church. I'm in a Bible study. I'm actually figuring out that the Bible is speaking to me, that it is a mirror showing me who I was, that it's stripping me of my pride and all of these things that I personally had to work through as an individual and as his wife. So God was doing a work in me for really the same amount of time that he was in the affair. He was growing away from me and I was growing closer to God.
And I did see a huge change in her, which made it even more difficult for me to be in the situation that I was in.
Because it was harder and harder to blame
because
her.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, because I was changing. God was molding me into who he wanted me to be. Yeah. So in that process, it was the message from God that said, fight for your marriage, even though everybody else was telling me like, he's being a jerk, peace out. Like I felt convicted really for the first time that I needed to fight for my marriage. So everything that I did was, what can I do to be fighting for my marriage? This is not, he's not the man that I married. At the same time, I know that man is in there somewhere. So in the moment, it was God that answered because I'm feisty.
No.
That's a great way to describe it.
That's a good word, right? Feisty.
You are feisty.
I'm responsive, but really more, I at the time, I was a very reactive person. So it was only God that did that. And I did show up shortly thereafter, who I was, I was in my sin.
The old Lisa, as you said.
Yeah, the very reactive Lisa.
Yeah, yes. Right.
But the reaction that he needed, to experience from me immediately, was what God gave through me. Right. I could not have done that on my own.
Yeah. And so then we know, life comes in and the reality of everything that had happened was being revealed. That became harder. And like you said, the old Lisa came out. If you had to redo it, this was just a question I had. You wanted to know every detail. As you coach people, is this something that is that a good thing? Or did it, because in the book I was like, I wonder if that's a good decision or if that's not a good decision. How would you respond to that?
So I did ask a lot of questions, a lot of questions. I asked every possible question you could ask.
Multiple times. Yeah. Same question multiple times.
Yeah. Hundreds of times. Yeah. As if I'm going to get some different answer, which makes sense because he was being deceptive and dishonest for years. And so, I wanted to make sure that this was actually the real answer. We now coach people to be very careful about what you ask because that information never leaves your mind. It might gradually fade away a little bit, but that is stored in my brain, that information, forever. And so typically we will coach people to ask why questions so that you look for motive versus very investigative questions of details.
Where
there are some details that you just need to know, and between the two of you need to decide that yes, I'm going to be honest about that. But if I would look back at it and how we work with couples currently, we recommend pray through what you really want to know. Like, ask God to lead you in what questions you ask, because you will in your flesh, like, ask questions that a couple of years down the road,
Maybe
you're
not
not going to
helpful.
want to have in your brain. Yeah.
In a similar area, you want to slowly, decide who you're going to share this with, outside of the marriage, because you can't take that back either.
Right.
And what feels right in the moment about, like, kind of saying, well, this is why everything was happening, and this, can come back to bite you years later. And some people are not as forgiving, if,
You can't control other people, and they tend to label, like I think you mentioned in the book, even some of the lies of once a cheater, always a cheater, things that aren't true with the gospel, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, because I know this is probably, I was feeling it too, like the line where you said, wrestling with forgiveness. Like, well, if I forgive him, if I forgive his actions, does that like negate everything he did? Like, explain that wrestling with that forgiveness and forgetting, not forgetting, forgiving.
Yeah. So, people say, like, they say all kinds of things about forgiveness that are not true. And I believed a lot of lies about what forgiveness actually was. And I was quite a grudge holder as well, as far as, like, if you've wronged me once, I'm not going to let you wrong me again, kind of thing. And, forgiveness is not about him, ultimately. It frees me. It's me canceling a debt that ultimately will just continue to hold me hostage if I'm holding on to this thing. Whereas if I forgive, I am released of hanging on to the weight of his debt. The Bible tells us to forgive as the Lord forgave us. Well, he forgave us in a pretty extreme way. Yeah. And so God asks us to do that in life. And for me, I thought, if I forgive him, does that mean that it's okay that he did this? Am I somehow accepting what he did? And I'm not. What he did was wrong, and I forgive him. It's not a but. It's not like in order for me to say what he did was wrong, I can't forgive him. I have to somehow hold on to this forever. That's not the truth. They're sitting in the same space. This was a mistake that Steve made that he will forever live with. And I can choose to forgive him.
Yeah.
It's also not a one and done type of a thing, so it's not like she said, I forgive you, and then everything was fine, and then we just moved on. It's a process. Ultimately, it's a lifestyle of walking in forgiveness and having to make that decision daily, hourly at the beginning when a reveal happens.
In our story, you can see forgiveness as a one-time thing, where even in the moment of the reveal of his affair, that was a very forgiving act to say, I love you, we can make it through this. Like, that was a one-time thing. And then we went through the process of forgiveness, where on the daily, I am going, like, I have got to choose to forgive again, because I would kind of fall into this pit of despair of just the weight of the circumstance. And then I'd have to choose to forgive again and choose to forgive again. And that became this process. And then ultimately it has become a posture. So it's a posture in our life where we're going to err on the side of forgiveness, because we have had to forgive really hard things, and we've had to learn what it really is. So I think people like to label it as either a one-time thing, or it's a process, or you just have to forgive all the time and not, just kind of, I forgive.
Yeah.
Where it's not that. It's kind of it requires something of you.
And you didn't always get it right. You explained that in the book, and then there was the do-over. Explain what that is.
Yeah. So the do-over is basically when you've said something or done something that you shouldn't have said or done, and in that moment you ask for a do-over. It usually happens in the situation where we're talking, we're arguing, or and I say something mean or she says something mean, and we just go, hold on. can I have a do-over? And it's almost like just asking, can I just have complete forgiveness of that debt, of that hurt that I just caused you, and we'll start over. And then,
Yeah, and this was something that we had to learn over time.
Yeah.
And it also came with the concept of being able to say, when I heard you say that, I felt hurt. I need to experience a loving tone, and
I need you to do that over.
yeah. Well, but when we actually, in the moment, I think one of the things that was so problematic in our marriage was that we were both hanging on to these things, the record of wrongs that he talked about.
Sure.
We're kind of, keeping this mountain of little grievances against each other. Or for me, I would hang on to them for a short while and then blow up. Mm-hmm. And what we realized is that in the moment, if we're in the middle of a conversation, we're having even just a minor argument, and one of us says something that we wish we didn't say, that we can say, hey, that was hurtful. And usually I can say, can I have a do-over? Like, I want to completely back up. And we've learned over time how to just rewind the conversation, start it again, and say something in a tone or with words that are loving and sharing our feelings in order to be able to understand each other well. We don't always get it right, but the do-over helps us sometimes especially realize, like, gosh, that was just a stupid thing to say. Let me just back it up for a second and not just turn it into this big drama.
Right. I love that. I think I'm going to be doing that more. I mean, with my kids at work, it's just one of those things. Okay, so that's super helpful. Now you spend like a good portion of a chapter, if not a whole chapter, on prayer. Now that's like the typical Christian thing, but it's not. Like, it's a lot of people skip that step. Tell us a little bit more about how important prayer was in this process.
Vital. For me in the beginning, during that time that I was fighting for my marriage, hearing that message from God, the way that I was hearing it was through his word and through conversation with him, which is prayer. Also, as I said, I'm reactive. I definitely err to the side of let me respond to something very quickly. So the concept of pausing when I experienced a hurt from him, or I'm questioning what's going on, why aren't we seeing each other, I really was clueless during the whole time of the affair. Just knew that he was not being a kind husband and not around. And so when I experienced those things, the idea of pausing and talking to God before actually reacting and blowing up or, doing something ridiculous, was totally new to me, but provided the peace that passes all understanding, which is amazing that God's word is true and he really does provide that. But I have my prayer journals from that time, and they were so remedial. And so I was such a green Christian, so it's like I was new and fresh. There were no fancy words, which we don't need, right? It's just, God, help me. And so we tell people, like, you just say, God, help me. Start with that, because you really do need the help. And I can honestly say that I'm so grateful for that, because I learned how to pray in desperation, desperately needing wisdom and guidance from him. And my prayers were pretty short, pretty to the point. Yeah. There was nothing, I didn't follow any acronyms, of all of the acronyms of prayer. It really did start with God help me, and he gave me what I needed in the moment. And so that drove me to continue to pray. So it was just like, wow, he's actually responding to me, not necessarily audibly, but giving me what I need for that moment. And so as I go through my prayer journal, which we share some of, I love that. You actually put
prayer examples, which I can just imagine how helpful that is for someone who might be reading this book and going through that. They can actually see words that someone who was in it prayed at that time.
Yeah, and they're simple, and it was life-giving to me. And from there, it grew gradually, as Steve began to be introduced to Jesus. So he, came to Christ through this situation in our marriage, and we began to actually pray together, which was like, whoa, that was weird. And things changed for us because now God was sitting at the center of our marriage.
Yeah.
Wow. And one of the parts of the book that I said at the beginning that I love is that you tell your story of different situations. So you had just mentioned the peace that passes all understanding, but for you, Steve, you mentioned on page 50 how a fog had lifted and you got a glimpse of reality. Explain the transition from being in it, this non-reality that you wanted to stay in, but then coming through that. What was that like? And give some encouragement to someone who needs to come through that.
Yeah, totally. Totally. When you're in an affair, as I mentioned earlier, it's like being in a fantasy. Yeah. It's like, I equate it sometimes to like being addicted to a narcotic. It's like you have this really strong desire and you have to have it, and then you have it, and then you're like, then you crash, and it's like, oh, this is terrible. I'm never going to do this again. I feel so much shame. And then you go, oh, but I just want that again. The desire builds up, and it's totally what it's like. I mean, it's like, anything that's hidden in your life, in your marriage, anything that you're keeping in the dark, that there's, your reality is clouded around you. And so when the reveal of the affair came out, the confession came out, we started talking about it. It was like I was walking out of a fog. Like the fog was lifting. I was able to see clearly again. It's like someone who, is on drugs and goes through rehab, or has a drinking problem and has detox, and all of a sudden it's like they feel better, they look better, they're seeing things for what they are for the first time, and it was like that. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. But I guess when you start praying for death, it's gotten pretty bad.
I was going to say that when you contrast that fog lifting compared to where you were, where that was the only way you saw.
It was the only solution I saw.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
People ask us all the time, how did Steve go from literally the day before thinking that he wanted to change spouses ultimately? Right. Like he had a plan with this other woman. Yep. They had future conversations. How did he go from that to literally shifting immediately to, I want to fight for my marriage? And it was seeing things as they were instead of in this, fantasy world that he had been living in. It does happen quickly when you're willing to see reality.
So Steve, you mentioned having friends, and there was a time where, not that you blame your friend for your decisions, but if someone, I want them to hear your view on this. You said, I wish my friend at the time that you told him, you did a little mini side reveal, I guess, a pre-reveal. Right. You told him about it, and he just was kind of indifferent. And maybe there's multiple reasons for that, but what did you wish he had done?
Yeah. So, I mean, at the time, it's important to understand, I not only was I not following Christ, I had no concept at all. Like I'm in Massachusetts, in Boston. It's like, I was Jewish, and my friends everyone was secular around me. It was like, find your soulmate kind of stuff, and so, but I knew that it was a problem, and so I went to one of my friends and confessed to him like what had been going on, and he was like, "Oh, that's tough." I'm sorry for you, man.
Go get lunch.
Yeah, right, exactly. He's like, "Oh, wow, really sorry you're going through that," but no words of advice. And so one of the things that we say to couples and to people just around us in our lives is that you want to choose wisely who you're going to seek counsel from, and who you're going to almost like let into your inner circle, who you're going to trust with helping you with a decision in your life. And we say that, if you're a believer, if you claim Christ, those inner circle people need to be other people that are going to lead you on a godly path, that they're going to support you, encourage you, be pro-marriage, be, to guide you. We've seen many times where people have put their trust in other people, whether it be family members that aren't believers, or friends or co-workers, and they have a different worldview. And it's not bad to be around those people. We want to be around all those people because we want to share the gospel. We want to have relationships with them. Of course, you can't really choose your family, so you want to be around them, ministering to them. But when it comes to something like that, like confessing to a friend, like, hey, I've been having an affair, for a year and a half. Yeah. What do you think I should do about that?
Because we have this earthly wisdom, and then there's wisdom that comes from God. That's and if they don't have the God side, only going to be earthly wisdom. And, you know, even believers will revert back to giving bad advice. We see that Job, you know, we don't always have, you know, we have to have God at the center of it.
That's right.
Yeah. So what would you say to someone, I know we've only hit the tip of the iceberg, tip of the Goldberg. Sorry, I couldn't help it. But they'll have to get the rest of the story in the book. Okay. But what would you tell somebody who's struggling right now? They're watching this video and they're like, this is me. Either they're in Lisa's position or they're in Steve's position. What do they do next? What's the next step?
Start even if you don't feel like starting. Move toward healing and toward your marriage, even if you're still in the space where you view your spouse as the enemy or where you don't feel hopeful. We needed to do healing things before we felt like doing them. And so I think we tend, especially in our world right now, we tend to focus a lot on how we feel about doing something. Like, I don't feel like doing that. And that's not really how God works. There's a level of obedience that he calls us to. And I do think that our obedience to his word was what helped us in those moments the most, because we didn't always feel like doing it. It wasn't comfortable. So we're looking constantly in our culture for a comfortable way of doing things. And the godly way was for us to lean into our marriage. God had already brought us together. We were already a one flesh union. So we didn't always feel great about it, but we knew that it was what God called us to. And now we feel so thankful, right? We do feel great about it. Like, we have a marriage far better than we could ever imagine in the beginning of our marriage. So it's just start before you feel like it.
Yeah, and also I would say, you know, be careful what resources you choose, and also be careful who you talk to, what kind of counsel you get. I mean, we are very much, you know, advocates of Christian counseling, biblical counseling, but there are many people that will just go to whoever accepts their insurance and think that that's going to be good. And not everyone is pro-marriage. A lot of counselors are very much pro, like, your own happiness and finding yourself. And so that's really dangerous. So if you're a Christian and you have a resolute, you know, attitude toward your marriage, you know, bring in those resources that are biblical and seek out wise Christian counsel. And we lay a lot of that stuff out in the book about the steps that we took. And so, you know, certainly at a starting point, I mean, as you said earlier, you can read it in a day and a half.
Right.
And so that's on purpose, that we did not want to make it a long book, because people going through this, they don't have a lot of time to read something that they need immediately. It's, you know.
And one of the things I love is that at the end of each chapter, you have this next steps. And it's just so helpful to give somebody the next step. Even like, so the good thing about this book is somebody can win this book or purchase this book. And it would help them, even I think that's a good first step, even if they don't know, because this will help give the courage to take even the next step. So get the book, grab the book. I'll link it down below. Any closing thoughts? And then tell us where we can find you again. Remind us of your website, or if you're on social media or anything.
People can go to thejourneytostay.com for the book, and staysidebyside.org for our resources and to be in contact with us. And we are an open book and more than happy to help people, so they're welcome to reach out to us. As far as last comments, God is real. I didn't know that when we got married. And he wants to sit in the center of our marriages. And we need to do, as Christians, everything that we can to allow that.
Yeah. And I would also say that, you know, I've been in worship ministry for a decade now, you know, and to think that this kind of stuff doesn't happen in the church, in leadership, it's very, very common, because there's this pressure put on leaders in the church to not be, you know, not confess their sins, not have this, you know, image of having any fault or anything. They try to, you know, put this like holy image out there, and it's so not helpful, you know? Yeah. And so we've unfortunately seen, you know, lots of leaders, you know, fall, and it's heartbreaking. Yeah. And so it's a resource, you know, for people in the church too. And just to know that you don't have to have it all together to be,
Yes.
Right.
you know, a leader in the church. In fact, you're stronger when you are, you know, leaning on Christ.
That's what I was going to say. I had something I forgot to say a minute ago, but we see that through Scripture, that God actually makes it inconvenient. I think you were talking about comfortable, makes things uncomfortable so that he gets the glory through it.
Yes.
We see like Gideon, you know, your army is too big, you know, all these stories. Wow, that's really great. And I was thinking about the depth of the pain of what you went through, in both of you, and Steve, just the feeling like what it would be like to come clean, and thinking about ministry leaders who, like you said, this is in the church. That's why I wanted to have this video on here. About how much harder that would be, because now you're in this position that's already supposed to be above reproach, right? But you're secretly involved in this. And I would just say to anyone watching what they're saying, like, just do it. Like, come clean.
Yes.
Jesus is where the truth is and nowhere else, you know, and Satan wants those lies. He wants it to be isolated, and he wants to destroy. And that's what we see. He wants the marriage to fail. He wants your soul to fail. So, all right. Thank you so much. I'll link all that below. Thank you for coming on here. Thank you guys for watching. Like, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff. And don't forget to enter the giveaway. See you in the next video.